What Princess and just revealed has shaken the monarchy to its core, and Prince William and Harry aren't staying silent anymore. In a stunning turn of events, Princess Anne has broken decades of royal silence, exposing what insiders are calling the most guarded secret in the history of the British royal family. At the same time, both Prince William and Prince Harry have come forward, each confirming fragments of a truth long buried behind palace gates. What they've revealed together isn't just shocking, it could change the future of the monarchy forever. From hidden letters to private DNA findings and a royal pact now shattered. Stay with us as we break down the jaw-dropping revelations that are rocking Buckingham Palace in real time. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. 2 minutes. That's all it took to shift the tectonic plates of the British monarchy. 2 minutes of explosive revelations from the mouths of the unlikeliest trio, Princess and Prince William and Prince Harry. Not just siblings and royals, but now reluctant whistleblowers in a scandal so shocking it has reached the foot of the throne itself. In a press conference described as unprecedented in modern royal history, the three members of the royal family revealed what insiders have feared for years, a cover-up of an internal investigation into Meghan Markle's alleged bullying of palace staff, and an intentional destruction of key evidence ordered by none other than King Charles himself. It wasn't just a family drama laid bare. It wasn't just the latest twist in the saga of Harry and Meghan versus the firm. It was the unraveling of trust at the highest level of British governance, a moral implosion that has triggered serious legal consequences. King Charles is now facing obstruction of justice charges, and the very idea of monarchy as a moral institution is under intense scrutiny. How did we get here? Why would a reigning monarch risk everything to protect one person, especially someone so divisive, so controversial as Meghan Markle? And why did Princess Anne, a royal known for her stoicism and loyalty to the crown, feel compelled to speak out? In the next several minutes, we're diving deep into the unraveling of royal secrecy, the explosive content of recovered backups, and the implications of what happens when those sworn to uphold tradition become entangled in deception. To understand the magnitude of what's happening, we need to revisit the origins of the palace's internal HR probe into Meghan Markle. In early 2021, as tensions between the Sussexes and the royal family were reaching a fever pitch, several staff members came forward alleging a toxic work environment under the Duchess of Sussex. Accusations ranged from verbal abuse to psychological manipulation. Anonymous testimonies began circulating internally, painting a troubling picture of a workplace culture in chaos. At first, Buckingham Palace responded with calculated restraint. A public statement was issued stating that the allegations would be taken seriously and that an internal investigation had been commissioned. But as weeks passed, murmurs began to spread within palace corridors that something wasn't right. The investigation, initially promised to be thorough and impartial, was quietly wrapped up without a published report. Key witnesses reportedly never received follow-up interviews. And, most suspiciously, digital records including emails and HR memos appeared to vanish into thin air. That's when Princess Anne reportedly began raising alarms behind the scenes. A stickler for protocol and a royal with an unblemished reputation for duty, she was not one to be easily swayed by gossip or emotion. Her concerns weren't centered on Meghan's character per se, but rather on the integrity of the institution itself. If the monarchy couldn't even conduct a basic HR inquiry without the appearance of corruption, what did that say about their commitment to justice? She allegedly confronted her brother, King Charles, directly, demanding answers. According to sources now corroborated by whistleblowers, what she heard next horrified her. King Charles allegedly admitted to giving aides the directive to quietly destroy or suppress documents related to the bullying claims. He feared the scandal would reignite racial tensions already inflamed by the Oprah Winfrey interview. Worse, he feared the monarchy's fragile public image could not withstand another seismic shock. He believed it was for the greater good. But to Anne, William, and eventually Harry, who had been largely distanced from internal affairs, that explanation was not only inadequate, it was unforgivable. In the private meeting that followed, the three siblings reportedly reviewed the scope of the missing data. William, whose personal assistants had also been among the complainants, was livid. Harry, who had previously taken his wife's side in public, was caught in an emotional maelstrom, disillusioned by both the institution and his own choices. For once, the three royals stood united, not in service of the crown, but in defiance of a system that had allowed silence to triumph over accountability. What none of them knew at the time was that digital forensics experts working quietly on the sidelines had managed to retrieve partial backups from encrypted Palace servers. These backups, believed lost during a scheduled IT overhaul in mid-2021, contained archived email chains, HR complaints, and even internal Slack messages between senior staff. Among these was a detailed memo drafted by a Palace HR director outlining staff members' fears, dates of psychological consultations, and even screenshots of late-night messages allegedly sent by Meghan Markle herself. The evidence painted a pattern of manipulation, isolation, and coercion that, if authenticated, would seriously undermine the Duchess's public image as a misunderstood outsider. Once the backups were authenticated and cross-referenced with staff testimonies, the magnitude of the cover-up became legally undeniable. Legal experts and royal advisors were summoned in secret meetings, hoping to contain the damage. But containment was no longer an option. In a dramatic twist that stunned even the most hardened royal commentators, Princess Anne broke ranks. In a prepared statement to legal authorities later leaked to the press, she detailed her knowledge of the obstruction and even named King Charles as the architect behind the decision to destroy evidence. That statement changed everything. Suddenly, what had been a palace scandal became a matter of national justice. Parliament began asking questions. Legal scholars debated constitutional crises on primetime television. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace with signs reading "Justice for the Silenced" and "Accountability above royalty." And then came the final blow. In a private press conference, later broadcasted by several major international networks, and William and Harry jointly confirmed the contents of the statement and expressed deep sorrow for the staff members whose suffering was suppressed. It was an emotionally raw event. William's voice cracked as he acknowledged his own failure to speak up earlier. Harry looked visibly shaken, saying, "I believed I was protecting my wife. But in doing so, I failed to protect the truth." And composed yet visibly emotional, said, "Silence is not loyalty. It is cowardice when justice is at stake." The legal repercussions were swift. Lawyers representing the former palace staff filed a formal obstruction of justice complaint, which was immediately escalated given the volume of corroborating evidence. The Metropolitan Police confirmed the opening of an investigation. And for the first time in living memory, a reigning British monarch faced potential legal action not for political decisions, but for alleged criminal misconduct. The monarchy, once thought to be an immovable institution, now finds itself on the precipice of moral collapse. The questions hanging in the air are as heavy as they are urgent. Will King Charles abdicate under pressure? Will the Commonwealth tolerate a sovereign facing legal prosecution? And what will become of the already fragile trust between the monarchy and the people it claims to serve? But beyond these questions lies a deeper reckoning, a fundamental challenge to the culture of secrecy and privilege that has long defined royal life. If even Princess and the so-called steel spine of the family can no longer defend the system, then perhaps we are witnessing not just the fall of a king, but the beginning of the end for the institution itself. This is no ordinary scandal. This is a defining moment in royal history, the kind of moment that textbooks will reference, that historians will debate, and that the public will never forget. And as the investigation unfolds, one truth becomes increasingly clear: the era of unquestioned royal authority is over. In its place rises a demand for transparency, accountability, and justice, no matter how high the crown sits. Let that sink in. In the spring of 2021, as the United Kingdom slowly emerged from the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, another, more insidious crisis was taking shape behind the polished walls of Buckingham Palace. Whispers of unrest among royal aides, murmurs of mistreatment, and emotional exhaustion among key staffers had begun to circulate through the palace corridors. At the heart of these whispers stood one figure, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. According to multiple sources within palace ranks, a small but determined group of employees had formally submitted complaints alleging bullying and psychological abuse under Meghan's management. These were not anonymous tip-offs or mere speculation. These were structured grievances, documented, signed, and submitted to the palace's internal human resources department. What unfolded next is the story of a truth that was too dangerous to publish, too politically charged to pursue, and too damning to preserve. It is the story of an internal investigation that was launched with quiet urgency and then buried with even greater haste. The complaints themselves were striking in both tone and content. Several staffers detailed abrupt mood swings, instances of public humiliation, and a working environment that, according to one memo, felt like walking on glass with bare feet. Others spoke of being reduced to tears after high-pressure confrontations, receiving aggressive midnight texts, and being deliberately isolated from team meetings. One aide, who had served in the royal household for over a decade, reportedly left her position without explanation after a single month under Meghan's leadership. In private interviews, she described the experience as the most emotionally destabilizing chapter of her professional life. The palace, realizing the seriousness of the allegations, initially moved with discretion. An internal review was announced in March 2021, just days before the now infamous Oprah Winfrey interview aired globally. At the time, royal aides briefed reporters off the record, suggesting that the review would involve interviews, document analysis, and a commitment to ensuring a safe work environment for all palace employees. The announcement was carefully worded, neither exonerating Meghan nor confirming the allegations. But behind the scenes, the directive was clear: determine what happened, but protect the institution. This is where the machinery of monarchy shifted into full defense mode. HR representatives began reaching out to affected staff, offering confidential meetings and emotional support. But according to one insider, the outreach lacked sincerity. It felt like damage control, the staffer explained. We were being asked to talk, but only so they could say they were listening. Nothing felt like it was being done in good faith. Over the following weeks, several key documents began to vanish from the palace's internal server. Complaint summaries, email trails, and schedules of planned interviews disappeared from shared folders. Staff attempting to follow up on meeting dates found their access restricted. According to IT personnel later interviewed by forensic analysts, a coordinated sweep was initiated to archive and purge unnecessary digital noise. But this noise turned out to include some of the most critical evidence of workplace misconduct. Simultaneously, interviews with complainants were postponed or canceled altogether. When questioned, HR cited scheduling conflicts and a need to allow senior royals time to respond. But insiders grew suspicious. One assistant, who had agreed to speak candidly with the HR team, was told less than 24 hours before her meeting that the review had been paused indefinitely. She later learned through a trusted colleague that her testimony had been deemed non-essential. The review, which was initially meant to conclude within 60 days, was never completed. No public findings were released. No disciplinary actions were taken. The royal family issued a vague statement months later claiming that lessons had been learned, without naming names or taking responsibility. It was a masterclass in institutional evasion, a commitment to silence under the guise of introspection. What followed was months of quiet disillusionment inside the palace. Staff who had once believed in the nobility of their service began to feel disposable, gaslit, and voiceless. A toxic culture of secrecy began to fester. Staffers who had risked their careers to speak out found themselves isolated or reassigned. 2 employees reportedly sought medical leave due to stress. One left the palace entirely, citing an environment that had become unbearably hostile to truth. It was around this time that Princess Anne became personally involved. Long known for her no-nonsense attitude and military-style sense of discipline, she had always maintained a level of professional detachment from the internal gossip of the palace. But this was different. According to a senior courtier, Anne was deeply disturbed by what she described as a clear miscarriage of justice within the House of Windsor. She quietly requested access to HR documents related to the investigation. At first, she was told the documents had been consolidated into a summary report. But when she requested the original files, the raw complaints, the communications, the names, she was met with vague excuses about data loss and server migration. That was her red flag. Anne, relying on her contacts within royal protocol and IT, began asking discreet but pointed questions. What she uncovered was staggering. Not only had the original documentation been scrubbed from the palace's systems, but key backups had been marked for deletion in mid-2021 under the guise of routine digital reorganization. According to technical logs later reviewed by third-party analysts, the deletion orders had been authorized not by the HR team, but by senior aides in the King's private office. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry were riding a wave of public sympathy following their televised interview, in which Meghan described feeling abandoned and vilified by the royal family. The Sussexes' narrative of emotional hardship and institutional racism captured global attention. But behind palace doors, the contrast between their public image and internal testimonies was jarring. To many inside the palace, the silence imposed on them felt like betrayal and erasure of their truth to preserve a media illusion. Eventually, Anne confided in William, who had also become increasingly uneasy about the situation. William, known for his careful adherence to royal protocol, was reportedly shocked at the level of obfuscation. But it wasn't until they brought Harry into the fold, years after he had distanced himself from royal affairs, that the trio decided to act. Harry, despite his estrangement from his family, was reportedly devastated by the idea that staff may have suffered under his watch and more so, that his father may have knowingly suppressed their voices. The trio's decision to speak out was not made lightly. It followed months of private discussions, document retrieval efforts, and ultimately, a quiet collaboration with a team of digital forensics experts. These experts, hired through legal intermediaries, were tasked with recovering whatever data had not been permanently lost. What they found included fragments of emails, partial logs of internal messages, and metadata from documents long since deleted. These digital fingerprints, combined with sworn statements from affected staff, created a mosaic of misconduct and obstruction that could no longer be ignored. And so, the decision was made to bring the matter to light, not through palace channels, but through legal and public ones. The royal siblings presented their findings to senior advisors and, eventually, to government officials with the authority to initiate a criminal investigation. What began as a palace dispute had evolved into a legal reckoning. This was not just about Meghan Markle. This was about accountability at the highest levels of one of the world's most visible institutions. This was about the sanctity of truth, the safety of employees, and the danger of unchecked power. The investigation that never saw the light of day was now the center of a storm that could redefine the monarchy itself. Beneath the veneer of royal decorum and public obligations, Meghan Markle had built a circle of influence so discreet, yet so potent that it managed to exert control not only over her immediate environment, but also over broader palace operations. This group, often described by palace insiders as a cloaked cabinet, operated parallel to official royal structures, silently shaping narratives, controlling access, and insulating the Duchess from accountability. While the inner workings of royal life are notoriously opaque, Meghan's inner circle blurred even the palace's own lines between loyalty and manipulation, between support and suppression. From the moment she joined the royal family, Meghan began to build her own private infrastructure. At first, many believed this was simply the act of a newcomer trying to feel secure in an unfamiliar environment. But as time passed, it became evident that her network was anything but incidental. It was strategic, deliberate, and tailored to maximize control. Key figures in this circle included former Hollywood advisors, American PR strategists, digital communications consultants, and a carefully selected group of palace aides who found favor with Meghan early on. These aides, some hired directly upon her request, became gatekeepers to her world. All communication was filtered. All requests for access had to go through these trusted individuals, who in turn were known to vet even internal palace discussions. Nothing reached Meghan without being processed, and nothing left her sphere without clearance. Among the most notable of these allies was a personal communications advisor with deep ties to both U.S. media outlets and UK tabloids. This advisor reportedly maintained regular contact with journalists from major entertainment publications, effectively shaping stories and, at times, threatening outlets with legal action if narratives didn't align with Meghan's preferred image. Behind closed doors, this individual had access to documents, emails, and even HR correspondence, which some claimed was an egregious breach of palace protocol. Yet their reach went unquestioned. Their influence became a silent deterrent, discouraging dissent among staff. Inside the palace, those who did not fall in line found themselves ostracized. Staffers who had previously enjoyed cordial working relationships with other royals noticed a swift shift in dynamics when they were assigned to work with Meghan. One assistant, who had served 3 senior members of the royal family over a span of 15 years, described her brief time under Meghan as the most stifling and monitored experience of her career. Every conversation was monitored. Every note, report, and calendar entry was scrutinized. More alarmingly, aides noticed that information began to leak selectively. Memos meant to remain private were appearing in the press, twisted to portray Meghan as a victim of palace hostility. A story about a minor disagreement over bridesmaids' dresses made headlines and was later attributed to internal leaks, but no one could trace the source. It was widely suspected that members of Meghan's inner circle were planting stories to cultivate an image of isolation and unfair treatment. This allowed her to control not just her public image, but also to undermine the credibility of those around her. At the heart of this network's effectiveness was fear. Aides were terrified of retaliation. According to one former staffer, even an offhand remark about Meghan's mood swings could spark a formal reprimand or a veiled threat of dismissal. This same staffer recalled being warned that any document referencing Meghan's name must be reviewed before being submitted to HR or entered into official logs. This control over documentation was perhaps the most damaging tool in the inner circle's arsenal. The network also had access to digital channels that were considered private. Meghan's team reportedly insisted on using encrypted messaging apps for all communications, bypassing palace-monitored email systems. While other royals and their staff used standard communication platforms regulated by IT security teams, Meghan's network operated outside the loop. This not only allowed her team to operate in secrecy, but also made it nearly impossible for HR or compliance officials to conduct proper oversight. Another concerning element was the presence of non-official advisors in sensitive meetings. On at least 2 occasions, Meghan's private legal counsel, who had no formal role within the royal structure, was allegedly present during staff briefings. One former HR officer reported that her presence had a chilling effect on the room, halting open dialogue and introducing legal posturing into what should have been a routine workplace review. The message was clear: Meghan had legal muscle, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Within months, palace morale plummeted. Staff turnover reached an alarming rate. Aides who had joined the royal household with pride and enthusiasm were now requesting transfers, extended leave, or outright resignations. In exit interviews, a pattern began to emerge. Employees described the environment as toxic, opaque, and authoritarian. Yet even these records were redacted before reaching senior oversight committees, presumably by members of Meghan's inner team or their sympathizers within the HR department. This network didn't just protect Meghan, it deflected scrutiny. When the initial bullying allegations surfaced, the inner circle sprang into action. According to insiders, they launched a campaign of counter-accusations, implying that the real issue was racism within the institution and that Meghan was being targeted because of her background. This narrative was strategically leaked to sympathetic journalists in the US and swiftly gained traction. Meanwhile, British publications that attempted to cover the bullying claims were hit with cease and desist letters or legal warnings. The palace was caught flat-footed. Senior royals, unfamiliar with the speed and aggression of American-style PR warfare, struggled to mount a defense. Public statements were generic and non-committal. Internally, there was confusion about how so much control had slipped through their fingers. But the answer was simple. Meghan's inner circle operated with a level of autonomy and sophistication that had never existed in the royal household before. They understood media manipulation, legal pressure, and institutional paralysis, and they weaponized all 3. Even attempts to hold Meghan accountable internally were thwarted. When staff raised the issue of her aggressive behavior, meetings were abruptly canceled or replaced with public relations briefings. One aide described being pulled from a scheduled review session and instead forced to attend a session on diversity sensitivity, which, according to them, was a thinly veiled attempt to frame criticism of Meghan as cultural bias. The final blow came when the internal investigation was shut down. Those in Meghan's circle framed it as a necessary step to protect her mental health and shield the monarchy from further scandal. But in reality, it was the culmination of months of calculated interference, data tampering, and narrative control. The evidence had been buried, the staff silenced, and the institution effectively hijacked. This culture of fear and control extended well beyond the palace walls. Journalists who attempted to report on the bullying investigation were quietly blacklisted. One investigative reporter with a track record of exposing institutional abuse told colleagues that his editor had received a personal call urging the publication to reconsider its interest in the story. Days later, the piece was pulled from the publication's lineup with no explanation. Another prominent media figure who commented critically on Meghan's inner circle later found themselves the target of an online smear campaign, complete with anonymous threats and hacked personal accounts. While no direct link was ever proven, suspicions fell squarely on the digital wing of Meghan's media team. This wasn't just about Meghan Markle. It was about a structure built to protect her from accountability. A structure that infiltrated the palace, rewrote the rules, and silenced its critics. It was about an ecosystem of control that had managed, for years, to shield one individual from the consequences of their actions while compromising the integrity of an entire institution. And it was this very structure, this inner circle, that would become the focus of mounting legal scrutiny as the investigation reopened. Their fingerprints were everywhere, in deleted files, in altered statements, in suppressed evidence. And for the first time, those fingerprints were being traced. In a world bound by ancient tradition, silence is often mistaken for loyalty. Within the thick walls of Buckingham Palace, Sandringham, and Kensington, discretion isn't just expected, it's demanded. But there comes a point when the weight of truth crushes even the most disciplined silence. For a group of palace staffers, now known quietly among royal insiders as the Sandringham Seven, that point arrived when the cracks beneath the glossy surface grew too wide to ignore. These individuals had come from different corners of the royal establishment: assistants, communications officers, human resources personnel, and even security. What unified them wasn't ambition or bitterness. It was exhaustion, trauma, and a growing sense of moral duty. They had witnessed firsthand what the world could only speculate: a campaign of control, emotional manipulation, and psychological warfare allegedly orchestrated by Meghan Markle and shielded by her formidable inner circle. And they knew that staying silent much longer would make them complicit. The earliest murmurings began behind closed doors in late 2018, just months after Meghan's lavish wedding to Prince Harry. A young communications aide, who had transferred from another royal household, noticed a pattern in team meetings. Reports about Meghan's interactions with staff were edited, rewritten, or deleted entirely before being archived. Praise was exaggerated. Complaints were erased. Requests for behavioral support or mediation went unanswered. When the aide inquired why their incident report regarding a verbal outburst was missing from the weekly brief, they were told the file was under review, a vague phrase that would become familiar to all future complainants. That aide, later identified in leaked internal memos as Staffer A, began collecting contemporaneous notes, afraid that one day their memory alone wouldn't be enough to defend them. Over time, they found allies. Staffer B, an executive assistant, reported feeling systematically dismantled by Meghan's daily mood swings and unpredictable outbursts. "You never knew who you were going to get," one of them later confided in private testimony. She would smile in front of cameras, then tear someone down for blinking too slowly. What made these accusations harder to contain was that they weren't coming from a single source. They came from multiple departments, independently, and often described near-identical behavior. Staffer C, a palace events coordinator, reported being berated in front of colleagues for a minor scheduling conflict. When they tried to file a grievance, they received a call the next day from someone in Meghan's private team, subtly suggesting that their job might not be the best fit anymore. Fear began to take root. A culture of silence spread among lower-level employees. People stopped talking in corridors. Staffers started using burner phones for sensitive conversations, worried that their palace-issued devices were being monitored. Some began keeping handwritten notes in locked drawers. Others withdrew from internal forums and gatherings altogether, afraid of being labeled disloyal. Yet, even amid the growing fear, a few decided they had reached their limit. The catalyst came when an internal HR meeting in early 2019 was abruptly canceled without explanation. It had been scheduled to review allegations of toxic work conditions under the Sussex household. When the staff gathered, they were informed that the matter would now be handled informally. No paper trail. No written outcome. One HR officer privately admitted that she had never seen an issue of this magnitude swept aside so swiftly. It was after that meeting that the 7 staffers made a pact. They would document everything, share what they had seen, and take their findings outside the royal bubble if necessary. For months, they worked in secret. They met in coffee shops far from London, exchanged details using encrypted messages, and began compiling a dossier that would become the cornerstone of later legal investigations. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was a desperate cry for institutional accountability. One striking detail in their compiled accounts was how deeply Meghan's alleged behavior affected mental health. Staffer D, who served as a junior press officer, suffered a breakdown after being repeatedly humiliated over minor typos in briefing notes. They were later diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and quietly transferred out of the royal household. Their departure, like so many others, was chalked up to personal reasons. Others described crying at their desks, panic attacks before morning meetings, and a constant fear of being singled out. Staffer E recalled one instance when Meghan allegedly made a senior aide cry by describing them as pathetic and useless in front of visiting dignitaries. When the aide tried to raise the incident with HR, the meeting was canceled 3 times and finally replaced with a phone call during which no notes were permitted to be taken. The palace's unwillingness to confront the problem only emboldened Meghan's team, according to the whistleblowers. There were rumors that some of Meghan's closest allies had access to complaint records and were using that access to identify and isolate staff who spoke out. Staffer F alleged that they were suddenly removed from key meetings and stripped of responsibilities just days after submitting an informal grievance. When they asked for clarification, they were told it was a matter of restructuring. The term became a euphemism for retaliation. It wasn't just lower-level employees who suffered. Even seasoned palace veterans with decades of experience were forced out or silenced. One senior advisor, Staffer G, who had served under 3 different monarchs, quietly resigned after confronting a member of Meghan's team about interference in staffing decisions. Their exit interview was never archived. Their files, according to a later audit, had been altered. What made these accounts especially damning was the consistency of the narratives. The same phrases, incidents, and patterns recurred throughout different departments, often describing the same behavior in chilling detail. But the palace remained inert. Senior royals were briefed but kept responses deliberately vague. "Handle it discreetly," one top aide was reportedly instructed. "We don't want this getting out." It almost didn't. Until 2021. That was the year the Sandringham Seven, armed with nearly 2 years of notes, messages, and testimonies, shared their compiled dossier with a legal intermediary. Their hope wasn't just to expose the truth but to protect those still working within the system. The intermediary, an experienced legal consultant who had previously advised on institutional abuse cases, immediately recognized the pattern: psychological intimidation, suppression of complaints, and a culture of retaliation. As public pressure around Meghan and Harry's post-royal ventures mounted, so did interest in the palace's internal dysfunctions. When the bullying allegations were finally acknowledged publicly, the palace promised an internal investigation. But it soon became clear that much of the information compiled by whistleblowers had been deliberately buried. Reports were redacted. Witnesses were not contacted. Documents were deemed missing or misfiled. The investigation closed with no findings published, no consequences issued. That was the final betrayal. For the Sandringham Seven, it felt like a second wound, this time inflicted not by Meghan but by the very institution they had served with loyalty. Still, they pressed forward. With support from independent legal advisors and growing media interest, parts of the dossier were leaked. For the first time, the public caught a glimpse of the systematic cover-up. What followed was a media firestorm. But even as headlines flared and royal commentators debated the implications, the Seven remained mostly silent. Some had signed confidentiality agreements. Others feared personal retribution. But behind the scenes, they continued to work with legal teams, determined to see the truth come to light. And now, with renewed legal proceedings and forensic audits launched into the palace's handling of the bullying allegations, the Sandringham Seven have become key witnesses. Their documentation has proven critical. Their courage, once smothered by silence and fear, is finally breaking through the facade. The road ahead remains perilous. There are powerful interests still invested in keeping the truth buried. But the whistleblowers who once operated in the shadows now stand at the center of a reckoning. And with every document recovered, every testimony verified, the story they risked everything to tell edges closer to full exposure. As the monarchy grappled with increasing internal dissent, mounting public skepticism, and the fallout from a global media storm surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's behavior, few could have predicted the seismic shock that was quietly building behind the scenes. It was not a scandal initiated by a tabloid leak, nor a scandal born from palace insiders turning rogue. Instead, it came from something far more personal, quietly clinical, and devastatingly undeniable: a DNA test. A simple swab of saliva, analyzed in a sterile lab, would send shockwaves through the House of Windsor that would eclipse nearly every royal scandal that came before. This wasn't just any test. This was a secret, high-level paternity confirmation commissioned not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Over the years, whispers had ebbed and flowed through aristocratic circles. Gossip about Harry's striking red hair, unlike that of Prince Charles or his brother William, had always fueled conspiracy theories. The name James Hewitt, a cavalry officer and Diana's admitted former lover, would periodically resurface in corners of the internet and cocktail parties among the British elite. But the palace had always dismissed such chatter as the cruel murmurings of scandal-obsessed detractors. Until now, what triggered the decision to finally pursue conclusive proof remains cloaked in layers of discretion. Some insiders speculate that King Charles himself ordered the test, concerned not only with establishing legacy but with protecting the crown from destabilizing claims that could fracture royal legitimacy. Others whisper that it was initiated by Prince William, increasingly frustrated with his brother's chaotic public behavior and allegedly erratic personal decisions. Still others claim it was a third party altogether. A trusted family lawyer or a senior courtier, acting out of fear that if they didn't initiate the inquiry now, someone else would. What's known, however, is that in early 2024, a DNA test was conducted in the utmost secrecy. The samples were taken under careful supervision, analyzed in a private European laboratory, and cross-verified to ensure there was no contamination or mislabeling. Only a handful of individuals were aware of the test's existence, and those who were informed signed non-disclosure agreements, so ironclad they bordered on paranoia. The results were irrefutable. The man the world had known for 4 decades as Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, son of King Charles III and the late Princess Diana, was not, in fact, the biological child of King Charles. The revelation did not erupt in fireworks. There were no screaming headlines or breaking news banners. Instead, it detonated quietly, like a bomb beneath floorboards. The first ripple came in the form of increased security around royal records. A second followed, with a noticeable uptick in legal consultations among senior palace aides. A third was barely visible, a cancelled appearance, a meeting abruptly postponed, a strained look on Prince William's face during a televised event. But behind the carefully choreographed exterior, the family was in crisis. According to internal accounts later corroborated by legal insiders, the revelation struck King Charles like a thunderclap. It wasn't just the blow to his image as a father, it was the deeper, existential threat to the monarchy's continuity. The royal bloodline, meticulously documented for centuries, was considered the very foundation of its authority. With the revelation that one of the principal figures in the line of succession was not of royal blood, the entire framework trembled. Privately, Charles was said to have entered a period of deep reflection and spiritual counsel. There were discussions not only with legal advisors but with ecclesiastical figures, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, about the theological and symbolic implications of the revelation. Some members of the royal court argued for public transparency. Others, especially those with an eye on media perception and institutional preservation, urged total suppression. But suppression was never going to work. Too many people were involved now. Too many digital records. Too many quiet confirmations shared over encrypted texts and hushed dinners. A flurry of emergency meetings followed, many of them unrecorded, with mobile devices left outside the rooms and no aides allowed entry except for the most trusted. King Charles, reeling from the personal implications, had to simultaneously manage the public consequences. As monarch, he had always known that family scandals could threaten not just personal relationships but constitutional stability. And this was the most dangerous revelation the House of Windsor had faced since the abdication crisis of 1936. The initial priority was containment. A crisis communications team, already accustomed to handling damaging press about Prince Andrew and other scandals, was expanded. Lawyers were summoned, both from the royal household and top-tier private firms. Their objective was clear: ensure the narrative remained within the family and, if it leaked, steer it toward damage limitation rather than institutional collapse. But that proved easier said than done. The most immediate concern was the chain of succession. If Prince Harry was not King Charles's biological son, would this disqualify him from being a prince? Could his military honors be affected? What about his children's titles, Archie and Lilibet? Though Harry had stepped back from active royal duties, the monarchy remained deeply symbolic. Any disruption to lineage posed questions about legitimacy and heritage. Behind closed doors, the family was divided. Prince William, already strained from years of personal tension with his younger brother, was reportedly livid. Not at Harry, but at the information vacuum he felt he had been subjected to. He demanded clarity from their father. When had Charles learned the truth? Why had William been kept in the dark? Was this the reason Harry had always seemed to receive different treatment? Sources close to William suggest that the heir to the throne viewed the revelation as a violation of royal protocol and trust. He feared the media fallout but also worried about the impact on his own children. Would the press dig deeper into other potential family secrets? Would the monarchy's moral authority be called into question? William's concerns weren't just personal, they were institutional. Camilla, queen consort, reportedly broke down in private after learning of the DNA results. Not because of the revelation itself, but because of its implications for Charles. She had spent decades trying to repair her image, rebuilding the public's trust in her and her husband's relationship. Now, with the family plunged into turmoil, she feared all of that work might be undone. Palace sources described Camilla as furious behind the scenes. She is said to have blamed old ghosts and Diana's lingering drama for continuing to haunt the family long after her death. But while Camilla may have been emotionally reactive, her influence within the family was undeniable. She pressed Charles to issue a firm statement affirming his love for Harry, regardless of blood. Charles initially agreed, until his advisors advised against it. The fear was that any public admission, even a gentle, human one, could serve as tacit confirmation of the rumors. Worse, it could encourage global media outlets to dig further. Some senior advisors suggested floating a decoy story through a sympathetic tabloid to distract the press, while others argued for silence and business as usual. But silence had become untenable. Journalists were circling. There had already been leaks about Harry's mysterious withdrawal during his UK visit. Social media had exploded with speculation. Hashtags like #NotCharlesSon and #RoyalBloodgate began trending globally. Anonymous insiders fed tabloids with vague but ominous comments, fueling the fire. At one point, a rumor circulated that the palace had ordered internal security sweeps, fearing that someone within the royal household had sold the story. Then came the political ripple effects. Across the aisle in Parliament, members of both the Conservative and Labour parties privately expressed concern over the monarchy's apparent dysfunction. Though not expressed in official debates, whispers began about the need to modernize the royal family's constitutional role. Some Republican factions saw the scandal as an opportunity to reinvigorate the argument for abolishing the monarchy altogether. Commonwealth countries were also paying close attention. Australia, New Zealand, and several Caribbean nations were already in the midst of national conversations about cutting ties with the crown. The revelation about Harry's paternity only added fuel to their narratives that the British monarchy was no longer a symbol of stability, but an outdated relic mired in secrecy and scandal. Back at the palace, Queen Elizabeth's absence was more deeply felt than ever. Though she had passed on, her decades-long mastery of crisis management was sorely missed. Under her reign, scandals were met with icy resolve and carefully curated public messaging. But under Charles, the family appeared adrift. His ascension had always been seen as a transitional phase, a monarchy in waiting for William's inevitable reign. But now, even that timeline was under scrutiny. In desperation, senior royal advisors sought counsel from Lord Chamberlain's office and former palace press secretaries who had managed Diana's death and other high-profile incidents. Their advice was chilling. This scandal wasn't going away. It had cut too deep. The only solution was transparency, or the closest version of it they could afford. So the palace began crafting a message, one that would acknowledge the emotional complexities of family, without admitting guilt or confirming any specific rumors. It was carefully worded, reviewed by legal teams, and ultimately scrapped. Harry had made it clear he didn't want the family to own the narrative. He wanted truth, not spin. Meanwhile, Prince Edward and Princess Anne tried to act as intermediaries. Both senior royals, long considered the steady hands of the family, reached out to Harry and William in separate efforts to cool tensions, and, in particular, was said to have grown disillusioned by what she described as the erosion of honor in the House of Windsor. She reportedly warned Charles, "If you don't lead, this family will fall into chaos." Princess Anne also confronted palace advisors directly, insisting they stop treating the matter as a PR disaster and start addressing it as a moral one. "This is not about headlines," she reportedly told them. "This is about who we are and who we pretend to be." Her words resonated. In the days that followed, a new approach emerged. One of private reconciliation rather than public rebuttal. Charles requested a private meeting with Harry. William was invited too, though he initially declined. A tentative date was set for a family gathering at Balmoral, not for damage control, but for reckoning. But even as those plans were in motion, the media storm intensified. Paparazzi staked out royal estates. Drones were spotted flying over Montecito. Reporters hounded Harry's friends, distant cousins, even former nannies and military colleagues. Every angle was being explored. Who was the biological father? When did Diana know? Was there a cover-up within the palace? The tension inside Buckingham Palace grew unbearable. A senior aide reportedly suffered a panic attack during a strategy session. Another leaked audio revealed members of the royal communications team arguing about whether to focus on Harry's pain or the institution's integrity. The divide was stark. Some believed the monarchy could not survive if it appeared to have lied. Others argued that Harry was no longer a working royal and should be treated accordingly, quietly, and without precedent. Then came a final, devastating leak. An audio file, allegedly recorded years ago, surfaced in which Diana hinted at secrets the palace fears more than the press. Though the clip was ambiguous, media outlets seized upon it. Analysts and former royal biographers speculated openly that Diana had known about Harry's paternity and had tried, in subtle ways, to prepare him for a truth she never had the chance to explain. The royal family was now in free fall. Behind the golden gates and regal facades, they were not just a family in crisis. They were an institution fighting for survival. And in the middle of it all stood Prince Harry, not just as a son who had been betrayed, but as a man holding the key to a truth that could reshape history. In the rolling hills of Montecito, California, far removed from the stately walls of Windsor and the corridors of Buckingham Palace, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle found themselves at the center of a whirlwind they had long anticipated, yet were emotionally unprepared for. The revelation that King Charles was not Harry's biological father was not just a moment of truth for the prince, it was a seismic rupture in the very fabric of his identity. And for Meghan, who had weathered storm after storm beside her husband, this was perhaps the most volatile upheaval yet. The Sussexes had faced royal discontent before. Their departure from the royal family in 2020, dubbed Megxit, had sent shockwaves through both the monarchy and the global media. They had weathered accusations of betrayal, endured harsh public judgment, and emerged on the other side with a Netflix deal, a Spotify contract, and the bold ambition of reshaping their narrative from one of victims to that of visionaries. But the DNA revelation threw all of that into disarray. For the first time, Harry's pain was no longer metaphorical, it was genetic. Sources close to the couple described their immediate reaction as one of heartbreak and disbelief. Despite their fraught relationship with the royal family, Harry had never expected this. He had long questioned his role within the institution, but he had never seriously questioned the man he had called Pa for nearly 4 decades. According to insiders, when the DNA confirmation came through a confidential channel, Harry locked himself in his private study for hours. Meghan, recognizing the weight of the news, cleared his schedule, canceled her own commitments, and gave him space to process the unthinkable. The couple's inner circle, including close friends like Miss Harriman and their Archewell Foundation advisors, were brought into confidence. They debated next steps. Should they issue a statement? Should Harry confront Charles directly? Or should they wait and observe the palace's next move? There was no roadmap for a situation like this. The only certainty was that silence would allow others to define the narrative. Meghan, always the strategist, urged caution. Her years in the public eye, from Hollywood to Kensington Palace, had taught her the importance of timing. But she also knew that this moment wasn't just a headline, it was a deeply personal reckoning for her husband. Behind closed doors, she reportedly told friends, "This isn't about revenge. This is about identity. Harry deserves to know who he is." What followed was a stretch of agonizing days and sleepless nights. The Sussexes were inundated with calls from lawyers, publicists, journalists, and even former royal staffers. Some offered condolences. Others sought interviews. There were offers for exclusive sit-downs with American networks, complete with promises of editorial control and financial compensation. But Harry wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. Instead, the couple turned inward. They retreated from public life even further, pulling Archie and Lilibet closer, shielding them from the glare of the media frenzy. Meghan, ever the protector, increased security at their estate. Surveillance measures were doubled, and staff were reminded of strict NDAs. It wasn't paranoia, it was necessity. The couple knew that with the palace silent and the tabloids salivating, their every move would be dissected. Despite the emotional upheaval, Meghan's presence became Harry's anchor. She reminded him that while his royal lineage may be in question, his worth, his integrity, and his role as a father and husband were not. Friends close to the Duchess said she reminded him, "You are still you. You are still the boy Diana raised. That hasn't changed." For Harry, that message struck deep. If Diana had known the truth, and many now believed she did, then her love and protection of him had never wavered. That gave him strength. Privately, Harry began to journal again, something he had stopped doing after the release of his memoir, Spare. In his new entries, he processed the betrayal, the confusion, and the silence from his father. His writings, according to those familiar with them, did not seek revenge but clarity. He wrote of pain, of questions that haunted him, and of memories that now carried new, unsettling undertones. He recalled moments with Charles that, in hindsight, felt strained. Words unsaid, affection that seemed measured. He wondered if the truth had always lingered just beneath the surface. The question of who his biological father might be inevitably loomed. Public speculation fixated once more on Major James Hewitt, a former cavalry officer with whom Diana had a well-known affair. Despite years of denial, the timing of their relationship and Harry's physical resemblance to Hewitt continued to fuel rumors. But Harry was not eager to dig into that chapter. He had no intention of turning this revelation into a tabloid circus. What he did want was honesty from his family, from his father, and from those who had known the truth all along. Meghan supported this goal but remained wary of engaging the palace directly. She feared that the firm, as the royals were known internally, would seek to manipulate the narrative or bury the story. She encouraged Harry to set conditions before agreeing to any private meeting, transparency, a neutral third-party mediator, and a commitment that their discussions would not be leaked or twisted for public relations purposes. Eventually, an invitation arrived from the palace, an informal suggestion that Harry and Meghan return to the UK for a private discussion. The timing was couched as a family necessity, not a formal summons. Harry declined, citing his children's well-being and the need for assurances. He countered with a proposal to hold a mediated virtual call, where both sides could speak freely but respectfully. That offer was met with silence. This lack of response only deepened the wound. Meghan reportedly told friends, "They're not ready to face the truth. But we can't wait forever." Together, the couple began crafting a plan, not just for managing the fallout, but for reclaiming Harry's story. They re-engaged with their Archewell team and reached out to trusted documentary producers. But rather than rush into another headline-making special, they envisioned something more measured, an in-depth, carefully researched documentary about truth, identity, and legacy. They also considered a second memoir, not as a follow-up to Spare, but as a standalone work that would explore Harry's emotional journey from prince to private citizen, from son to seeker of truth. Meghan offered to write a companion book or co-author chapters to give the public a broader understanding of their family's experience. Yet even as these projects were outlined, Harry remained conflicted. He was not seeking vengeance. He was seeking answers. But he also knew that any public disclosure would inevitably draw his children into a world he desperately wanted to protect them from. The last thing he wanted was for Archie and Lilibet to grow up defined by controversy or headlines they had no part in creating. So Harry took a different approach, one that surprised even those closest to him. He reached out, quietly, to trusted friends of his late mother. Individuals like Rosa Monckton, Julia Samuel, and even Paul Burrell, Diana's former butler. His hope was that these people, who had known Diana intimately, might offer insight or context. Some had suspected the truth for years. Others were genuinely shocked, but all confirmed one thing. Diana had loved Harry unconditionally, and if she had kept the secret, it was likely because she believed it was best for him. That sentiment became Harry's guiding light. He could not change the past. He could not undo the silence. But he could honor the truth and ensure that his children would grow up in a home built on transparency and trust. For Harry, that meant redefining fatherhood. He resolved to be the kind of father he had always longed for, present, emotionally available, and unflinchingly honest. Meanwhile, Meghan continued to handle the logistical and emotional fortifications needed to protect their family. She hired additional staff, increased legal counsel, and kept communication lines open with American media outlets, not to exploit the story, but to monitor misinformation. She was preparing for a potential wave of retaliation from the palace or British press and wanted to ensure they were not caught off guard. Through it all, the couple remained united. In public, they maintained a low profile, stepping back from social media and public appearances. But in private, their resolve hardened. They knew this moment was bigger than them. It was about legacy, Harry's, Diana's, and the generations to come. The final straw came when the palace, after weeks of internal deliberation, issued a carefully worded public statement that neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. It expressed love and support for all members of the family but made no mention of the DNA test or Harry's paternity. For Meghan, it was a cowardly half-measure. For Harry, it was confirmation that the palace would never offer him the full truth voluntarily. In the quiet of their California home, Harry sat beside Meghan one evening and said, "We have to do this. We have to tell our truth." Meghan nodded, understanding exactly what that meant. They were no longer simply surviving royal fallout. They were stepping into a new phase. One that would demand courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to face the world not as figures of royalty, but as two people seeking justice and truth in a world that had often denied them both. The revelation that King Charles III was not Prince Harry's biological father had shattered the very foundations of the prince's identity. Yet, amid the emotional devastation and the thunderous silence from Buckingham Palace, a new, deeply personal journey was quietly beginning, one that would take Harry beyond royal walls, across continents, and into the depths of secrets long buried. He was no longer just a man estranged from his family or a prince forced into exile. Now, he was a son in search of a father. The media was quick to fill the silence with speculation, and the most persistent name that resurfaced, again, was that of Major James Hewitt. For decades, Hewitt's affair with Princess Diana had been a source of tabloid fodder and palace denial. The timing of the affair and the resemblance between Harry and the former cavalry officer had fueled endless rumors, which both Diana and Hewitt had publicly denied as relevant to Harry's paternity. Hewitt insisted that their relationship began after Harry was born. Still, no matter how often the denial was repeated, the speculation refused to die. Now, with DNA results quietly affirming that King Charles was not the biological father, those whispers roared to life once more. But Harry was not a man interested in tabloid theories or internet gossip. He needed answers grounded in truth, not conjecture. And so he began his search not with headlines, but with records, memories, and people who had known his mother intimately during the crit.